And you look at some tins you buy on eBay or you get mint, and you look at it like, man, that kind of tin. It's like, dude, why is that 2/7? Why does it say 2/7, sir?
That's the morning after.
Yeah. Oh
And you
gosh.
and you roll over and you take a look at what's the other side of the pillow. And you're like,
You're like, Jim, man. Ugh.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 16 of the NextGen TCG podcast. This episode's title is "The Sky is Falling, the Market is Crashing," and I am your host, Nick Tetra Ninja. And as always, I have the most interesting man in the world with me today. He's the most interesting man because he never seems to sit still. Always shaking, always wheeling, always dealing. The one and only gem in Pokemon, Zach Browning. How are you today, Zach? How you doing?
You're way too kind, man. You're way too kind. I feel like I was hugging you the other day, and now we're so far apart, and life is so different. So I had the fortunate opportunity to go see you in Canada last weekend. It was an amazing experience, and I have to say, Tetra is one of the most wholesome people I've ever met in my entire life. The best host I've ever stayed with.
Oh, you.
I kid you not, man. It was unexpected, and it's made me think Canadians are pretty nice people. It was very surprising.
All right, so it's been a while since our last episode. A lot has happened. Zach came up to Canada to visit myself and my wife for 2 to 3 days. He made a pretty big deal up there as well, which was the main purpose for his trip. And as you can probably tell, he has a different background going on, not his typical office space, because you have moved. He literally moved apartments. So moving is a pain in the butt. Hate moving, hate when people ask me to move, but you're in new surroundings, new environment. How's your new place? How you doing?
Oh my gosh, I love it. I feel like I've needed to make this move for so long, and the place is comfortable. It's got a lot of space. I've got a storage room. I've got an office. I've got a bedroom, a living room, and so it's really going to let sort of the functionality of everything come together. And man, moving sucks. There's a lot of stuff you got to do with moving, and there are way too many boxes. Like, what is in what box? I do not know.
When we moved to our current place, we literally had a room that was floor to ceiling, just boxes. And we did not touch that room for a full calendar year before we actually started. We went in there and pulled out stuff that we needed, but with the stuff that we didn't need, it was literally floor to ceiling with boxes. But yeah, moving absolutely sucks. So this is not obviously, since you're still moving, this isn't your permanent office setup. I think we're right now in your living room. So we got once you get settled in, we'll upgrade and update and up the game of your background, because we need good production when we do these podcasts, because that's what the people come for. Anyways, your trip before we get into the deal that you made, the trip to Canada, we did a bunch of fun things. You gotta try a whole bunch of stuff that you've never tried before. Tim Hortons coffee, sent you home with some pure Canadian maple syrup. You tried ketchup chips, and you tried my favorite candy. Oh, there they are. He also tried my favorite candy of all time, which I was shocked to learn that you guys do not have in the United States, which are fuzzy peaches. So give me the rundown. Tim Hortons coffee, was it everything you expected?
It's pretty good. I think you described it perfectly. It doesn't slap you in the face. It's got an interesting flavor, and it's a coffee I think you could drink every day. It doesn't blow you away, but it's also not gonna it gets the job done. It's a good tasting coffee.
It's extremely affordable. It's $2 a cup, so it's not your $6 Starbucks. Anyways, ketchup chips. That's Canadian, so that's 30 cents American. So ketchup chips and fuzzy peaches. I told you this in person, that if you have guests over and you're serving them breakfast or what have you, it is in Canada considered a cardinal sin to not put pure Canadian maple syrup on the table. So you got so I made sure that we did right by you. We don't serve Aunt Jemima here in Canada. Well, we have it, but you don't serve Aunt Jemima to your guests. You got to give them the real deal Holyfield with the pure Canadian maple syrup. So those are the stuff that you tried. We also took you to a bunch of places. Probably the CN Tower. Went to Ripley's, went to an aquarium. But probably the main thing that we got you to see was Niagara Falls, and it was kind of funny because we were talking about like Niagara Falls, like we took a whole bunch of pictures as well as videos while we're there. It was just like we were talking about the day before we actually went. We were talking about like how long that it would take to see, and you were kind of funny, and we were like, we'll just go there for like 5 minutes. We'll just check it out and see what it looks like, and then we'll just leave, right? And I was just like, that I clued immediately that you've never seen one of the seventh wonders of the world, Niagara Falls, before. So, what was your experience when you first got there?
Well, you described it to me like, oh, we're gonna pull up, walk down a little trail, and then we'll be there. And I'm like thinking we're like walking through the woods, and boom, there's the falls, and we turn around, and then we get there, and it's like this like national park, like well done. There's tourist spots everywhere, and you kept telling me the Canadian side's better. Okay, yeah, and the view was pretty good. Like it was like it's a big falls, man. There's a lot of water coming down. Like it's definitely like worth going to see if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's we had a nice little date with you, myself, and my wife, and I'm glad that we got a chance for you to experience it firsthand. So, other things that we did while you were down or up here up north is that we got to see some E4 members as well, a couple days in a row. So one night we had quick drinks with PFM Scott as well as his partner Clara. And we had drinks. We had a Billy Miner pie at the keg. That's one thing that you also got to try. So thoughts on Billy Miner pie?
It's pretty good. It was really good. Like
it's actually
I remember
my favorite dessert of all time.
So Tetra's like, hey, do you want to try anything out? And I called a friend down in Florida. He's like, yeah, I was in Canada last week for a Toronto card show. He's like, dude, I had this pie. It was really good at the keg. And I said, hey, Tetra, we should go to the keg, try a pie. And you told me, like, dude, that's my favorite dessert, like, ever. And so I was like, we got to go. We got to try it. So
yeah, it was delicious. It's always nice to see people that you've been talking to for years and years online. I know that you recently also saw them. They were in Japan as well. Just very nice, down to earth people, and hopefully we will get to see them again fairly soon. But
yeah.
we're kind of burying the lead here because there's a reason you didn't come to Canada just to see me. There's a reason why you came to Canada, and that was to close out a deal. So I'm going to give you the floor here. You can talk about your big purchase while you're up here.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've sort of progressed into is hobby memorabilia and hobby art and sort of historical items that are just true treasures of the Pokemon, lore and hobby, the creation. And I reiterated, a couple times that, as a kid, I never really had the opportunities to go to these events and experience it. And, you work hard in life and eventually you're able to kind of create some of those opportunities. So looking back, what I really want to preserve is some of the stuff that's early in Pokemon. And, I sort of alluded to kind of a dream being creating a museum someday. And today that's still a dream. Getting that to reality would be amazing. And so long story short, essentially I met up with someone who had got the semifinalist trophy from the 2002 Pokemon Worlds. And this was the first world championship by Wizards of the Coast. And that is referencing the trading card game. Because, if you there's another trophy that auctioned for 2000 from Australia, and that was related to the video game side. And so when you talk about WotC, Wizards of the Coast, and from 1999 2003, they had the license. Their first world championship was 2002. Then it didn't exist in 2003 because the license switched over. And then Nintendo had their first Worlds in 2004, and that's when the 2004 World staff cards start. So there's really only one World Championship from Wizards of the Coast, and that's where you got the official trophy. So I was able to buy the semifinalist trophy from the friend of the winner, and so they're like kind of a team as far as they like combine collections and they play together all the time. And she's the person I picked up from is more into finance and really good with money, and the guy who won the trophy kind of relies on her to kind of help get the best price for things. So it was really a cool team, and they showed me a lot of the stuff they had collected over the years, like cool autographs from all the different people. They had tons of cool pictures of just like Ken Sugimori autographs, like Ishihara autographs, Arita autographs, ones I'd never seen before, which are really cool. And so going back to that hobby history, just experiencing it for the first time from someone who had actually gone through that is really like a remarkable experience that I wish I could share more, like with the community, with the hobby. And the weird part about all this is a lot of times the parents will remember more than the kids. So the parents are almost the better people to talk to about like what actually happened. The kids are like, "Yeah, I got on stage, got a trophy," and the parents are like, "Dude, man, it was a battle. Like we were fighting." you know.
So just for clarification, so the trophy that you ended up purchasing was won by a player named Brian Cresswell. He came third place in the under 10 division. He played a for alligator slow king deck. What's interesting is that on the website is he's actually mislabeled as a US player because he's actually from Canada. So we were kind of confused about that when we were digging into the just trying to like cross reference everything, make sure everything's on the up and up, everything makes sense in terms of the placement and everything and the storylines that go along with everything. So we met up with one of his fellow competitors that was on the scene with him, and she kind of like broke down. We were really interested in was we wanted, because both you and me, we're mostly collectors. We have zero no, well, I have zero knowledge of the actual competitive scene of what it's like to be a competitive player, and it was just really interesting to see like this like complete, even though we're all enjoying the hobby in some sort of way, just like how vastly different that we are in terms of our approach to things. He told us we talk about like high end stuff, hundreds of $1,000s worth of cards that are focused on just pure playability. They said, and she said like you can put like a decently competitive deck all together for like $50 and you have a pretty good time in the hobby. So
I think the crazy part with a competitor, like a player versus a collector, is the player a lot of times will value the $5 card and the $10,000 card the same. Like, oh, check out this Fraligator. It's so cool, dude. It crushes this deck. And you're like, hey, man, that's like a beat up $5 Fraligator. and you're like, hey, this Lucky Stadium over here is pretty special. Like, and they're like, oh, dude, no one plays that. It's so funny to see their mind work.
yeah. So we took lots of pictures of the trophy, the meeting, and we just overall, what were your thoughts of like now that you've kind of had some time after the purchase? Do you have Are you happy with the purchase? Any buyers or remorse? What are your overall feelings thus far right now?
There were a couple trophies, the Yokohama and the London trophy off Golden, the first place that we're auctioning. And I thought those trophies were going to go sub 10K each. And they ended up blowing sort of out of the water. They sold for really strong prices. And so I feel much more comfortable with the purchase now, just given those like price references and stuff. But, I've seen a lot of trophies buy and sell privately. And you reference those prices, sort of build a sort of a market for it. And I think the ones at Golden were, I just think they went extremely high for what they were, given that Unite is something where I don't want to get into all the details, but there's more trophies out there, just more and more coming out each year.
No,
And
get into the details.
okay,
We
get into the
spent
details.
we spent 5 minutes talking about fuzzy peaches and ketchup chips. We can actually spend some time talking
Okay,
about the actual stuff in the hobby. I'll
okay,
give you the floor here.
okay. So for Worlds, you basically have 4 events that all get physical trophies. Two of those events get the cards, and then two of those events don't get the cards; they just get the physical trophy. And the Unite event actually has 5 players on each team, and so not only do you have like for TCG you have the age groups, junior, seniors, masters, so you get one first place trophy for each. Now with Unite, you now have 5 trophies going to that, which is more than any other age category combined. And so the overall supply of these trophies is going to be flowing into the market. And yes, they're new and there's not as many yet. But give it 3 or 4 years from now, if they don't change the style of Pikachu trophy, like it's just going to be a much more accessible trophy, given what these go for. And so, if I don't necessarily think those are as cool because there's so many of them, and the Unite players, it seems the whole team is like ready to sell. Like multiple players on the team, like, hey, what can I get for this? It's like trophy. A lot of times, the hardest part is getting someone to sell. A player will sell their trophy card way easier than their trophy. And a lot of the players value the trophies more than the card. And as collectors, we know the cards are like 2, 3, 4, 5x like what the trophies are. Like you see a first place Pika going for over 100K. It's like a first place trophy doesn't come close to that. Like I don't think one will ever sell for that. It's a totally different like category that comes alternative investments. And so like seeing all that happen made me feel better. Now at the same time, I did buy a third place trophy, so it wasn't like I got the number 1 or the number 2. And from what I understand, that there were 3 age groups in the 2002 Worlds, juniors, seniors, and the masters. But the
Professor.
masters or professor, yeah. for whatever reason, the professors didn't get trophies because they were like, "You're too
You're
old. You
old.
don't
You
need
know, you're too
trophy."
old. You don't need a trophy. Get out of here. It's for the kids.
like, like what? Like you won, but no trophy dog and no trophy card. Like I don't know. So with only two age groups getting trophies for 2002, long story short, it means the trophy that I bought there's only 4 copies in the world, which
Mhm.
is just a really cool data point. And there was open bidding for it, so like I definitely paid the highest price of any of the open bidders. But at the same time, it's just cool to have a piece of history, and we're working on the museum. Who knows when it'll become more of a reality, but it's another really cool piece that we can throw in there, and hopefully one day I can share it with you all. So
I'm excited for the purchase. Just overall, I was kind of when you told me that you were buying like a trophy, like a TCG trophy. When I finally saw it, there was a little bit of a like air let out of the tires because it's kind of just like a standardized cup trophy. It's nothing like designed like the trophies that we see now of like with Pokemon,
yeah.
where like there's like an intricate Pikachu design somewhere among the trophies. So there was a little bit of a letdown, but I think you still have to respect the history. I respect what it represents and the history about it. But I was like, it was still nice to see in person. It was it was stored in okay shape. There was a couple of scratches on it as well, but you did get a free backpack as well. So that's
Hmm.
a player's backpack, which is also a nice bonus. But it was very exciting to see it in person. So congratulations on your purchase.
Hmm.
Hopefully, it'll bring you happiness for years and years to come. All right. So since it's been such a long time since our last episode with Zach's traveling and coming up to Canada, a lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff has been moving in the hobbies. So we're gonna move into market trends. So first thing we're gonna talk about 1999. We talked about TMV, TMV, but this is Japanese TMV. At number one, TMV PSA 10 copies sold for 120K, and just kind of as a reference point of like when you talk about premiums between like first place, second place, third place. A couple weeks ago, we talked about a number two PSA 10 copy being sold for 81,000. So basically a $40,000 premium from jumping from number two to first loser, as I would like to call it, second place. So sorry, from jumping from number one to first loser. So what are your thoughts on that price? So what do you like?
I feel like we're finally seeing strong prices for trophy cards again, and I know it's a 10, and there was like an SSB Mewtwo a couple years ago that sold for 250K, which in hindsight's a really strong price. But I feel like we've seen so many trophies go for that 50, 60, 70K range that are like it's not like there's 100 of these trophies. Like yes, extra copies exist. Yes, there's multiple copies of a lot of these, and a lot of them are high grade. It's not like most trophies are fives and sixes. It's like a lot of trophies are like eights, nines, and tens. There are multiple tens on some of these. And so seeing like it break 100 and then hit like the 120 range, that was the same as that like the trophy with the guy's face on it. One of the I think the e-reader trophies, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it's a Neo trophy. And I think it was the e-reader trophy, which is really really cool. And so to me, like 120 feels nice. Like it doesn't feel like it's blowing you out of the water, but it doesn't feel like someone's getting like a steal of a deal where it's like too good. Like it feels like it's going for a good price, and I think it's a good indicator for the market because we've had so many weeks of like big cards just constantly pop up that feel like they're getting like average to below average sort of sales. This makes sense to me, and I like this price.
Yeah, the main topic of this week is like the high end market, just kind of like taking a dump basically. We're gonna talk about various reasons in our main topic when we get to a little bit later. But like I said, like you said, at 120,000, you talk about. I think that's a good price for this card because it's a very polarizing card. Executor is not the most. It's not like a famous or I don't know many species collectors of Executor. In this case, the person you're just buying history at this point, owning trophy cards. So I like yeah. I like 120K, and when we talk about like the premium of 40 to 120, we're talking about like the people we've mentioned this in previous episodes. You have to give the people with the deep pockets that like to justify their purchases. So we're gonna talk about that's why you get number one versus number two. You're inherently you're going to see a premium of a number one versus the number two, because people like to justify the prices and how they spend their hard-earned money. So yeah, I think, like you said, good price for that card. All right, so this next one I'm really excited for because we featured it last episode. This is the PSA 10 Masaki Gengar, finishing off at 28.8K. The person who won this must watch our podcast, and they've probably heard that we talked about how Masaki in general is super criminally underrated for the amount of copies that were distributed and the amount of PSA 10 copies that were out there. And I think that both of us can agree this is not going to be paid for. This is not
makes no sense.
It makes no sense. It's not going to be paid for. But let me live in my ignorant bliss, okay, Zach? Let me live. Let me live there, okay? Let it live rent free in my mind for at least a couple of weeks, because
how many Masaki Gengars do you own?
And it's also kind of an indication of also kind of how this is not going to be paid for, because Masaki Alakazam, PSA 10 copy, also newer cert. I think it's in the 4 cert, whereas the Masaki Gengar was in the 2-3 cert. So generally people have come to the consensus that newer certs are the condition of the PSA 10 grade is a little bit more solid because they're harder to achieve. The Masaki Alakazam finished at only 6.3K. So based on my experience in the hobby, those two have always been pretty much neck and neck in terms of their overall value, their blue chip value. So to see one 5 times the price is it doesn't make sense, and it's probably not going to get paid for. But I like to live in that world.
There's no way we have that kind of influence on the Masaki Gengar. Like, that would be utterly insane. Like, yes, we agree that like this makes so much more sense than like a Pancho Pika at like the crazy prices they were going for. But like the Alakazam to me is so cool because it's doing like the double team where it's like the kind of the this and that, and like Gengar's a ghost Pokemon, Alakazam's psychic. I kind of put those in that same sort of like weird aura, just kind of like mysterious mystique. You're climbing up the tower, fighting Sabrina, this and that. And like I love the Alakazam artwork. It's one of my favorite Alakazam. It's probably a top 5 Alakazam artwork for me. And if I was buying one of the two, I mean, I get the Gengar gets that Gengar premium, but dude, you could literally buy 4 of the Alakazams for what this Gengar went for. Like, let's just make comparisons within the Masaki set itself.
Overall, if we see Mario Pikachu's finishing at 5,000 around there, 6.3 for a limited edition card, very difficult to get, vintage. That price doesn't make sense. So either the Masaki Alakazam is grossly undervalued, or the Poncho Mario Pikas are overvalued. So that's just my thought process. Since we're on the topic of Poncho Pikas, big card. Black Label Poncho Shiny Zard. Mega Zard. Poncho Pika finishing off at 15.5K. So Black Label Quad 10's the only way to get a quote unquote perfect card in the hobby. I'd be more impressed if it wasn't a Poncho Pika, because like I said earlier, bulletproof print quality, but you gotta risk it for the biscuit. They were fortunate enough to send it to BGS, and they did get the elusive Black Label, which I thought like 15K is a lot of money. But with PSA 10 copies regular, I sold one recently. Actually, I auctioned one in the last PWCC block, and it finished off at 5,000, which was a price that I was more than happy with. I feel I always in my head 4x price of a PSA 10 copy. One for every subgrade, one multiplier for every subgrade. So I thought, like, when I saw 15K, I was like, I think like 20-25 would have been a good price for that card. But maybe at that point you're talking about like a different tier of cards, especially they're not rare. I'm glad that I know there's a chance they could go higher. But I'm very happy that I unloaded at 5,000. To be honest with you,
I mean, 5K is a strong price, and who doesn't have to worry about the ability to pay on most things, black label collectors. Seems
Yeah.
like they always have the ability to pay, and it seems like the pockets of black label collectors just are ever so deep. And you continue to see record prices. I mean, they do better than the CGC Perfects, better than PSA 10s. Like you said, it's always been a multiple PSA 10s. Like, not only do you have like the highest, grade, so a lot of people consider PSA to be like, the creme de la creme of grading. The 10s typically gather more than like, the gym mint cards at other grading card companies. And so for the black label to be regarded so much higher than like what people were kind of calling like the top tier of a card, it just still kind of blows my mind. Because if the whole market's saying, an 8 price here, 9 price here, to 10 is like here. So 5K is sort of the cap. And then that black label just to get that 3X multiplier, like it so far surpasses that people truly want the best of the best. And when you see the illustrator go for these crazy prices in the past, when you see Gary offered, 700, 800K for another BGS 10 Zard, it really goes to show that when people want the best of the best and money is not an object, like the market can go wild. And this, I love seeing black label price. I'm not a black label buyer, not a black label collector. It doesn't make sense to me. When you consider buying this at 15K, where does that price go? Is the opportunity there? Does it actually go to 30K? Does it go to 50K? Or is it better to buy like a $50 card and watch that card grow to 250? So it just, a lot of times for me, the math on black labels don't make sense. It feels like a pure collector play.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, price point. Black label first edition Charizard. What's the price? If it
Given
existed, it doesn't exist. Well, let's put that out there. It doesn't exist. As of right now, there are 3 BGS 10s on the market right now. Gary has 2 of them, and then Logan Paul has 1 of them, which originally belonged to Gary at some point. So what's Black
so
Label? What does Black Label get you?
so there's the 3 BGS 10s. There's 2 CGC Pristines, and I have talked to people who looked at the most recent copy, and they've said if there was one card that existed that had the best chance to hit that black label or hit that CGC Perfect, the last one graded has literally the best shot. I honestly think the owner should try to get a black label with it. I think there's a legitimate chance that if a card exists, it would have been that copy. Um, PSA 10s are kind of around that 200 to like 220 range, in my opinion. Gary's had the public offer for 700K. I feel like Gary would probably come down off that a little bit given today's market. I feel like Black Label has to hit over $1 million. Then at that point, it's who can push it the highest. So one factor is what's the buyer pool like and how strong do they want to push it, and the other factor is as collectors, consumers, and speculators, what do we think it should be? And really, where those two equal out is kind of like the buyers saying, "Hey, we want to push it way, way higher because we have more money and this whatever," or is it the collectors that just value it higher and it goes low because there just aren't the buyers for it? So kind of two different scenarios. I would like to see that card go for over $1 billion. 1.5 to 2.5 would be like a really impressive sale, but it has to hit at least $1 million in my eyes.
I'm on the high end. That's exactly my guess. My guess was 2.5. If the Black Label first editions are ever hit the market, I think 2.5. I think Pokemon first edition Zard is just it's the bread and butter of the card of this hobby. Everyone knows that card. Not everyone understands what an illustrator is until you dive a little bit deeper into the hobby. And I think when you're talking about if there's only one available, I think that 2.5 would be. I'd say that's the floor. To be honest with you, I think 2.5 would be the floor, but we thought the CGC 10 illustrator would go much higher, and we were both wrong. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's move on to some more Japanese stuff. So 2003 Victory Orb. So this is a PSA 10 copy, finishing off at 7.8, and it goes to show you that sometimes it's important to have an actual Pokemon on the card. So this is the non-Mew version. Anytime you add like a Pokemon to a card, I think it just we'll talk about this as well as the next card as well. It just adds a different element. So with the Victory Orb, quote unquote Victory Orb Mew, you have kind of like the pop collection of Mew floating in the background of the card. This one is just the straight orb, similar release numbers. I think like the high end of the Mew a peak was like 30K. So finishing this card finishing at 7.8. It makes sense to me, but just because without we're in the Pokemon card collecting hobby, the TCG, and to have a Pokemon card without a Pokemon anywhere on it, it does detract from the overall eye appeal of the card. So yeah. All right. So moving on to another card. Once again, no Pokemon. This is the 2005 Champions League PSA 9. So there are only 24 copies of this card, and there are 36 copies of the Master's Key, which is probably its closest comparable. I was actually very surprised when I first saw the price. I'm like, oh, a PSA 10 copy finished at 16.2, and then I look closely. That's a PSA 9 copy. So for a long time, this card I always thought that people didn't really like it once again because it didn't have a Pokemon on it. So that kind of like changed my whole perspective on it. So it does add one thing that you sometimes just can't beat Rarity. I think you can't beat Rarity in some cases, but who knows? I personally feel that the 16.2 is probably what a PSA 10 would finish for. PSA 9 I think is far beyond what I expected. So if this card actually sells, I think that the seller should be very happy with that price point.
Yeah, I think 16.2 is pretty strong. It's a card that just doesn't pop up that often, like you said, not that many copies, and I think this is more of a factor of not being available, which is something we'll dive into a little bit. But it's sort of an issue of if this card popped up once a month, it's probably not a 16K card, but you don't see it all the time, and so if you need this card for your collection, or if you're collecting that sort of era, you're trying to get one of each of the cards, you only have 24 chances to get it, barring extra copies, and either you're going to take it or you're not. And yes, it's a 9, but at the same time, like it's, I think this is kind of hitting that equation of like, you got to get it when it's available, and if it's not available, then
you don't get it. You don't get it. You don't get it.
Thanks.
All right. So next we got a triple threat coming up here. We got the snap, the Thanos snap cards coming in. So we have all three of the starters recently sold. So we'll start off with. Okay, first off, which one do you want to start off with? Because the one that you start off with is I'm gonna judge you on.
You're gonna judge me on
Yeah.
which starter do you pick at the beginning of the game?
What starter do you use? What starter are you choosing?
Oh man, let's start off with the Squirtle. Let's
The
start off with
Squirtle.
Squirtle, because I think if you get Blastoise, it's a fun game. Charizard feels like you're just bandwagon fanboy, and Bulbasaur is like you just want to be brutal, like you just want to suffer. And so like Squirtle's like, it's Niagara Falls, Squirrel Squad. You got the cool glasses, double Hydro Pump. I'm talking Expedition and Team Rocket combined. PS8 Squirtle, great sale, 73.2K. There was so much interest and so much hype around this sort of layout of auctions. Like I had so many people that either were trying to figure out ways to become bidders on these cards, whether it was increasing liquidity or whether it was selling off parts of their collection or consigning things to Golden as in sort of an effort to get a higher bidding limit, or people that were like reevaluating like their collection priorities just because the snap cards are so rare. The highest quantity snap card is 20, minus extra copies. Just going to throw that caveat because no one knows how many extra copies there are of any card. And so it's like if you want one of the three starters, it's so iconic, and this is your chance. And they're really not that available. And to even add one to your collection is an opportunity. So I think going into this, no one really knew where they were going to price at. I could tell you for certain none of them were going to go low. None of these are going to go below 50K, given at least probably 10 different people are going to make sure of that. But how do you feel about where the prices ended? And did you expect them to go higher or lower?
I expected higher. I'll be
Really?
honest with you, because we've been talking about snap cards for a minute now, and the baseline price for a snap card is at least 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
So the Squirrel in particular, this is the highest graded PSA copy with the PSA 8, and there in total there's only 6 graded Squirtles out there at the moment in PSA. So I expected as just as a starter, I expected at least to bust that 6-figure mark, at least
Mm-hmm.
100,000. So I think that that was just my overall impression. They're just so iconic, and they're like you said, they're never available. And to have a starter, I valued all the starters to be at least 100,000.
Yeah, and the biggest condition issue with snap cards is off center. And so like the chances are notoriously off center. That's why a lot of them were eights. And the ones that are nines usually have like an 8.5 centering grade, sort of whether it's present or not. So getting the eight Squirtles, like like you said, it's the highest grade. I also am sort of in the same boat as you. I thought that they would break 100,000. I get that like the coughing PSA 10 went for 50K. I get that the Articuno and some of those other ones are sort of pushing that 50K, that they're going higher, sort of in the secondary market, closer to probably that 80K range. But these are the starters. Like and the Pikachu, that comp alone being 270K, I get that there's only one Pika. I get that it's probably an extra copy. I get that the rarity factor of that, and it is authentic, so I make great with that Pika. But the Pika is almost like it's like a relational point to the starters. And yes, there are more Squirtle, Charmanders, and Bulbasaurs on the market. But I thought they'd break 100K too, and the thought behind that is mostly due to the interest that we saw pre-auction and during the auction. Still great prices overall. They don't feel weak, but I thought the interest was going to push them higher.
Yeah, so the other two starters, we have PSA 7 Charmander finishing at just 79.3, basically 79,000. There are only two. This is the lowest PSA graded card. There's only two PSA graded Charmanders entirely on the market. And I thought, especially with like, we're in the Charizard business. Let's just, we're in the Charizard business. No, we're not. We're not. But Charizard is such a popular species and popular Pokemon that I thought like that alone would push it past that 6-figure mark. But with PSA 9 Bulba finishing at 80.5, I 100% thought that was going to hit it at least 100,000, just because the PSA 9 Snap card we talked about like the offsetting issues these cards generally have. A PSA 9 Snap card is basically a PSA 10. I don't think we'll ever see a PSA 10 Snap card. I know obviously we have the CGC 10 coughing that came out, but I don't think we'll ever see a PSA 10 Snap card out in the wild. And not just like species, just overall eye appeal. I think like I've said this before, I'm not a huge fan of Snap cards. I think they look silly, but amongst the three, it's like, to me the Pikachu card looks ridiculous, as well as the Gyarados card. The Pikachu card reminds me of kind of like like one of your very first Instagram posts where you put the camera way too close to your face. You just kind of like, you don't know what you're doing at that point. The camera's way too close to your face. But I think in terms of like eye appeal of the actual artwork, the three stars are okay. I think the Bulbasaur is probably the best amongst the three. But when you talk about the Gyarados, the Magikarp, not a huge fan. The Articuno looks really weird as well. But yeah, I would say if I was selling these cards, I would be somewhat disappointed with the price points.
At least the Articuno has like an attack or some sort of move in there. But I guarantee you that these snap cards, whenever they got the picture, they probably got the high score or whatever at the end, where it's like calculates as a Pokemon in the center of the frame. You got a good angle. What's going on? So whatever algorithm they used in the Pokemon Snap game to get a high score, I bet you that all these cards did well in that. I do have one other like thought behind these snap cards that may be why they went low. And I think it could be like an issue with how the auction is structured. And so if you think about it, it's very difficult to get approved bidding on Golden. I think like 5-6 years ago, I asked for a bidding limit, and I showed them an account with more cash than that limit, and they said no, and I was like, what? Like this doesn't make sense. Like, but long story short, with bidding limits, like with Golden, let's just say I'm just going to cater this to this auction. Let's say that Golden gave you $100,000 bidding limit on this auction. And that means that they will only allow you to place $100,000 worth of winning bids. So you actually, once you hit $100,000, you cannot place another bid until you get outbid on another item. And a lot of times when you have an auction block end, when you have, like, let's say you have an auction block with 100 items, and they set the auction block to where none of the items end until there's no more bids. The reason they do that is because if you were losing the Squirtle or the Bulbasaur because it went high, and now you're like, okay, Bulbasaur's too high, I'm going to bid on the Squirtle. If the Squirtle would have already ended and you get outbid on the Bulbasaur, now you leave that auction not winning anything when you could have been an extra bid on the Squirtle because your bidding limit's capped at 100. Now, if you're bidding on all 3 snap cards, you don't care which one you get, you just want to get the cheapest one. You may be placing $200,000 plus worth of bids, and you may be only trying to walk away with one. And so when you have that bid limit, it sort of forces you to only bid on one card until you get outbid. And if that other auction ends, then you're just SOL. So have you given any consideration to that?
No, but one of the considerations I've come into is if all these cards were from the same source, same owner, it was stupid to auction them all three at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The best way done it was to spread them across because you run into situations that you just explained perfectly. That
Mm-hmm.
bid limits, although we're talking about like another tier of people's wealth at this point. We're still talking about a decent chunk of money, and you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
people reevaluating the collections, moving things around. There's only a set amount of money that some people have at a specific time, and if you're trying to like get maximum value for something, your best is just to separate the big ticket items over time, which is once again, right, we keep talking about which is our main topic. We'll get into that a little bit later. All right, so finishing up, this is the prelude into the main topic of our market is crashing title, our clickbait title for this episode. We have the BGS 9 Illustrator coming in at 274.5K. So, all right, so we'll move into our main topic, which is the clickbait title of the market is crashing. The market is crashing not only on Battle Day Lily, but as well as illustrators, because there are a lot of illustrators. We have seen a whack ton of illustrators in 2023. I have never seen or heard of this many moving, especially on the open market, as we've seen right now. And bottom line, it's really pushing the price for basically one of the most sought after cards, if not the sought after card, in most valuable card in the entire hobby. So let's start off with what we've seen this year and confirmed sales that we have seen as of late.
Yeah, so the CGC 10 Illustrator a month or two ago went for 495K golden. Felt like a very, very low sort of sale price compared to where everyone thought that the price was going to go. The BGS 9 Illustrator just finished for 274.5K. There's also a PSA 8 Illustrator live at golden at 175K. Right now, it's still an active auction. And then Heritage also has an authentic altered Illustrator live as well. And authentic is considered to be sort of like the low grade as far as like below, like a lot of times people consider it to be like a below a PSA 1. If you're going to get graded, get it graded. But when you see authentic, usually you get a basement price. But to see authentic altered, which tells me that someone went and did something to the card, whether they were trying to polish the hollow foil or maybe use a little pen to sharpen up the edges, or maybe they did something sort of a little mischievous with it. And sometimes altered isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it could be like there are situations out there where like an altered card wasn't like it's like
Was it
someone,
nefarious?
yeah, it wasn't nefarious. And so there's most of the time altered means nefarious, but I don't want to just fully categorize it as that. A lot of times you see altered, your first thought should be nefarious. Like, I don't get me wrong. Like, your first thought should be, what did they do to it? Like, so not only give a basement price, do something below that. And so I think whatever this authentic altered Illustrator goes for, I think that's going to be the rock bottom of Illustrator. And if that goes anywhere close to this PSA 8 price or the BGS 9 price, um, that's going to be surprising to me. So we'll see. We'll see. I think for a couple of years there, it seemed like every illustrator had sort of a 250K minimum on it. It didn't matter what the grade was, whether it was a PSA 9 or like a PSA 5 raw. It seemed like every raw illustrator was going for 250K. Yeah, that's kind of just a quick backstory of the illustrators.
So let's talk about like just like market dynamics and what has caused all these illustrators to be flushed out, kind of seemingly all at once and all at the same time. So I'll let you lead on this one.
Yeah, so Illustrator over the last like 5-10 years has sort of been pictured as like the card for the hobby. It was a contest. It was given out in a way that it was a cool card. You couldn't have just gone out and bought it. You had to win it, and it was given to a bunch of people. A lot of them kept them over the years, and even at the time, they had some really high sales. And so it was just a cool card that just encompasses a hobby. It has a Pikachu on it, and you can see like Charmander in there as well. Just the whole sort of, it kind of encompassed the whole like artwork, and
There's
just so
also
many.
there's also a Mew on that card.
Yeah, if you look
if
hard enough, you can find it. You
if
know,
you look hard enough, so if you're a Mew collector and you're a completionist, I just ruined your entire life because you will need an illustrator to complete your Mew collection. So
yeah.
sorry about that one.
You'll get it someday. If you believe, you can achieve. But no, it's just a card that just, it's been the icon of the hobby, and there's so many news articles and support, and really everyone's kind of widely accepted it as like the Black Lotus or like the Grail, and it's a promo. It's not something you pull out of a pack, and it's been the hobby leader. And so there was a deal for a 9 around 900 to 1 million a couple years ago. The Logan Paul is the record $5.2 million sale, where 4 million of it was cash, and then the 1.2 was the value of a PSA 9 illustrator. And so it's literally like made the headlines that like the 101 ring made for Magic recently. It is the card of the hobby, and there's not that many people that can afford it. And even when it was a lower price, even when it was 10K or 50K, like a lot of the people that collect that grew up with Pokemon as a kid, that were between like the ages of 7 to 12 when Pokemon came out, like we're just not making that much money now. And a lot of people can't afford a 50K card when they're 25. A lot of people when they're in their mid 30s can't afford a 200K card. And so a lot of people that are able to buy these are literally people who are just in a different situation in life. And there's just not that many people that have that amount of money of extra cash that are going to put it in an illustrator. Like one, they have to be a Pokemon fan, or you would think. And then two, like of all the things in the world they could buy, like they're going to pick an illustrator. And so when you put this much pressure behind it, you have this much supply just feeding it, you're going to have that downward pressure. And I don't think every illustrator buyer can buy 10 illustrators. I don't think they even want to buy 10 illustrators. There might be a couple that can, but it's a situation where you're testing the market and you're seeing free economics sort of just say, hey, we're not going to give it the rarity premium that it has always deserved. We're going to sort of let true market dynamics. So if you want to buy an illustrator, now's the time. That's really the answer.
That now is the time, because I'm gonna be blunt. People who are selling this are not doing it the right way. They're not. This is not the correct way, because we talked about it so many times. Beginning of this podcast, last episode, people with a whack ton of money, they want to justify their purchases. And if you're a person who is trying to justify a purchase of $250 million, and you're on that fence, and you're just kind of like constantly seeing the thing that you're trying to buy hit the market all at the same time, it's going to impact your buying decisions, because you're like, oh, maybe this thing isn't as rare as it's hyped up to be, or this copy is as cool as good as another copy. Maybe I'll skip this copy. This card is not as rare as like I said, as I once thought it was, and it's just bad business practice. Personally, what I think, like I know there's probably a ton of reason why, like you talked about, like social media. I'm sure the whole Logan Paul thing, um, that became worldwide news basically, with his social media influence, which probably was a contributing factor to a lot of these illustrators being flushed out of Japan at the same time. But I know there's economics involved. People need to rotate capital, stay liquid. You don't want to you don't want to hang on to it too long, because you need that free up that money to do some other projects or some other purchases. But like, you're trying to sell the idea of rarity, but at the same time you're like really force feeding all these cards into the market at the same time, and it's just, they're all coming from different places. Obviously, all these people can't collude to get, well, they could. It'd be difficult, but you can't. You say, "I'm gonna sell my illustrator now." Don't you hold on to yours, and you run the risk of it going a little bit lower in 6 months. But it's, yeah, you're selling the idea of rarity, and it's just not. Timing is everything, man. Like, especially like time of the year that you sell a card. Like, we're coming up at the near end of the year where people have pretty much allocated the amount of money that they've already are planning to spend for the holidays. January, February, absolute worst time to be trying to sell cards, especially higher end cards, because people are just tapped out. They are tapped out. That first Visa bill coming, Visa Mastercard bill, that Blue Monday, and the credit card company is calling, and it's just people's buying power at the beginning of the year is just so low. But it's it's the risk that you run when you send things to auction. Like,
I'm sorry. I was gonna say I think there are rock bottom prices for certain cards. I've had conversations with multiple people that say if a first edition base 10 Charizard hits 100K, I will buy every single one of them, and they can support that up to like 10 copies or something. Like they don't necessarily want to spend $1 million in Charizard, but they think 100K is such a good value, they're going to buy as many copies as they can. And I'm sure that there are people out there with an illustrator that say if this card goes down to 200K, I own one. They're supposed to only be 39. Maybe there's 50. Maybe there's 100. Who knows? But at this price point, I have enough capital to like support it. And I've gotten the issues before. Like I'd say a long time ago, where you kind of support a price and you're like the only person supporting it. Where you get to the fifth copy and you're like, dude, like why am I always, like right here? And sometimes you have to let a few slip. And I've done that with like no simple jungles. I've sort of bought a lot over the years, and had to let some slip. But if you buy everything of every card, you artificially support that price. Or if you let a few kind of fall through the cracks, you can see like true market. And so this BGS 9 really felt like it fell through the cracks, and you're seeing kind of what a true market is that's not being artificially supported. And I think some of the illustrators may have been artificially supported.
so I think important as well. We're not in like illustrator price range, but I think an important thing to note is just try to remain as liquid as possible. It's also like don't if you're trying to support marketing, you're just trying to support all with that price point, especially when you're talking about trying to move like big ticket items like that. When you're trying to bank on the idea of rarity, it's the noose gets tighter around your neck, and you may be forced into a position that it's probably long term the most advantageous for yourself. So lots to talk about, lots to watch coming up in 2024. The hobby never disappoints us.
So moving on to the next topic here, we have Collector's Corner, where Nick and I will pull a cool card out of our collection, show it to you guys, let you guys learn a little bit more about us, things we like, things that appeal to us, and we'll give some kind of story if we have it, a little background on certain cards. So years and years ago, you go through all the sets and you try to find a cool artwork or something you really like, and I always remember thinking there's some cards out there that it's like, why is that card priced so low? Or like, that doesn't make sense. That's such a cool card. Or like, it's so cool. And my card of the week this week is going to actually be the Expedition Mewtwo, and that beautiful, beautiful artwork. It's like the most dominating Mewtwo, and I'll get you guys some cool footage because my lighting here is horrible. But it's one of those things. It's such a cool artwork where you get the Mewtwo in the pose. He's got the two hands just ready to attack. It feels like the movie Mewtwo just ready to explode. And I'm going to do something I feel like I rarely do. And I'll show you a little bit of a position that I have. And so it's one of those cards that I did support the market on a little bit. I did buy a few, and these are the 10s and these are the 9s. And so, whoops. Oh, whoops! That one's a 9 now.
Well, that one's an 8 now.
Oh, sorry. No, but this card is just so beautiful. It's got a Cosmos Hollow foil. It's got that blue, the purple. It just feels like the psychic just kind of coming out of him. It's kind of got a little glow in the card, and I just thought it was such a cool card. And Expedition's got 32 hollows in the set. You only get 12 hollows in a box, and the boxes are crazy expensive. That for me, it's like, I told myself that if I bought doubles of every card, I'd go broke. And so I sort of forced myself to pick a certain amount of cards I buy doubles on. And it's like anytime that card came up for a good price, I would buy it. And so kind of like how we think that some cards that we talked about earlier are being artificially supported. I kind of bought these to a certain point, and when they hit a price point that I thought was kind of like, okay, market's kind of really taken off here, I'm going to stop buying. And I kind of stopped buying after it hit that point. But still own all the Mewtwo's I have. I did the same thing with Expedition Mew, sold those sort of when they were selling for way too much. But the Mewtwo's I just think are cool, and still just hold on to them.
Yeah, it's I try to do that with we're talking about justify things in your head, justifying like purchases. I did that with the Lotto Zard. Just everything it hit there's so many things that were working for that card. My buyout price was like $400. But it was anything
Hmm.
below $400, I bought like a copy of that card. And I think overall you united pretty well on those. I wouldn't call them gambles, but those bets. But Expedition Mewtwo is definitely it's a very dominating card, like you said. It's the alpha Mewtwo. It's kind of wingspan, there's lightning clouds going in the background. It's a huge contrast from the Expedition Mew, which is like this very cute Mew and like this fetal position, just trying to be all innocent, and then you have the Mewtwo just like taking no prisoners, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Cool fun fact about Expedition Mew. Of like WotC from 1999 to 2003, Expedition Mew is the only Mew you can pull out of a booster pack. And so I'm not talking about promos or movies or Southern Islands or whatever, but if you're going to open a booster pack of cards, Expedition Mew is the only one you can pull out. And to me, that artwork looks like base set. Like it's simple, it's not attacking, like you say, and it's like the rookie Mew. It's what it kind of feels like.
Thick hollow. That hollow is so thick, which is why there are so few. It's like the Skarmory. Other cards from name some other thick hollow cards from Expedition that have kind of kept
Oh man.
the population down on the PSA 10s.
Oh man, I mean, not Expedition, but I always think of like Blaine's Moltres from Gym Heroes. It's like you got the card, the Pokemon's like a little thing in the card, and the whole rest of the card's like holofoil, which is kind of nuts. Expedition is just such a good set. It's loaded. I truly think if Expedition had crystals, it may be more valuable than Skyridge. I think Crystal Charizard and Skyridge carries it. And there's a lot of cool artworks in Skyridge, but like literally you have doubles of Charizard, you have doubles of Typhlosion, you have all the best Pokemon in Expedition. And it's such a well-rounded set. It's just missing crystals, like base set.
Expedition Blastoise is really cool, as well as Expedition for Alligator. Like they're like awesome artwork, but Skyridge does Skyridge is awesome artwork as well. Like the Skyridge Flareon's good. I like that one. Crystal's obviously always really good. Aquapolis, I feel although it's a big hit, I feel like the Lugia is undervalued. The Crystal Lugia, for what it's worth. I know it's still up there, but I feel like it should be worth a lot more because that card is absolutely incredible when you get to see it in person. But you made a good gamble with Expedition Muse in the long run. I made good gambles with Lotto Zards in the long run. But sometimes your gambles don't pay off, and sometimes you like, despite what you think, the market just it doesn't react. So my card of the week, I'm bringing another Gengar. This one is, and if it's a modern card, Zach, it's modern. I love modern.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
What
I
are we
don't know.
doing?
I don't
So
want to know.
my card of the week is the recently released Sword and Shield Staff Gengar. Double stamp. So it has the pre-release stamp as well as the staff stamp. So I've been trying to find things to do in this hobby and trying to justify purchases, which is like a main theme. I thought that staff cards would take off eventually, especially when you have like the first staff card, the staff Charizard, which was selling for exorbitant amount of prices. One of the first staff cards, anyways. I thought eventually, with the overall rarity hard to get, they never actually were ever distributed in the proper way that they're supposed to be distributed to the actual staff members, because the stores just ended up just keeping them and selling them on eBay, which is why during the pandemic they actually discontinued the staff line, just because they weren't being distributed in the correct way. So the Pokemon company said, we're not doing staff cards anymore because you guys are literally just scalping them all on eBay. But after the pandemic and in-person events started happening again, they, in their naivete, thought that now we can actually get these cards to actual staff members. It doesn't happen. Anytime you see a new set comes out, you see an influx of staff packs, because usually staff cards come in like a 4-pack of select cards with the pre-release stamp as well as the staff cards, and there's set amount of cards, and anytime a new set comes out, you see the sets go on eBay for I say are usually around, depending on like the species, obviously. But the base, I think like the base price for a staff pack is usually around $300-400. If you get Charizard in there, potential for Charizard. We got a lot. We recently got a lot of staff Charizards. I actually ended up picking one up as well. Um, I'm assuming you probably did as well at some point, just because you need to maintain that Charizard collection, right? But
Maybe.
long story short, staff cards haven't taken off as well as I expected them to. I'm still buying. I can buy like unpopular species of staff cards for like $150 each at some point. Obviously, if you get into more popular species such as a Gengar, I think this one cost me $500, which is still a decent price, I think, for a Gengar staff card. I was just banking. I was just banking on rarity at that point, and sometimes even your gambles don't pay off. Like a lot of staff cards that I had now still sit around buy now price of like 100. I got like a whole bunch of them back with my last shipment of from Mason. You have like, well, I have another one right here. Let's see. I have
Is it?
I have a staff Snorlax right here.
Oh,
This card,
nice.
I love this artwork. It's the second staff Snorlax that's ever came out. There's a Call Legends ones where it's like doing Shadow Ball as well. But I love this card. This card, $200. $2 you can pick up for staff Snorlax these days. So I think if I were to reposition myself, I'd say probably move away from just buying all the staff cards.
Hmm.
Just focus on more popular species, Umbreons, Espeons, Charizards, Gengars, safe bets, all evolutions. So like I said, sometimes like despite what I think I know in the hobby, sometimes your valuations just aren't the market. The market bears what it can bear, right?
So, when did you buy that card? Did you buy that card before you took a break or after you took a break? Because I'm trying to figure out when did Tetra like all of a sudden switch to modern is okay.
The Gengar I recently purchased within the last few months, obviously because it's a card that was released in 2023. I was okay. When I say take a break from the hobby, I was like still like if a cool card popped up once in a while,
Hmm.
I'd buy one. But
Yeah.
the thing is like I had stuff sitting in my PWCC vault for like several years,
Hmm.
and then like I had cards with Mason. Like he could have kept it. I would have completely forgot. I had like a battle royal Pika that like
Hmm.
a stamp battle royal Pika that he had for like literally 3 years.
Hmm.
And like after 3 years times he could have kept it, and then like it would have been like 50-50 if I would remember. But
Hmm.
yeah, I was still buying here and there once in a while, not nearly as much as I was in my heyday. But I was picking up stuff that was cool.
And moving on to the final segment of our podcast is where we get into viewer questions. You can ask Nick and myself any questions you guys have. Feel free to post them down. And if you get them posted before the next podcast, we'll go through them and give you some feedback. And so Pasu81 asked a pretty interesting question. Do you think PSA, especially on 10s, is overvalued? The worst 30% pool of PSA 10s has to be worse than the best 30% of PSA 9s. And so to rephrase that, Pasu's basically saying the bottom tier of the 10s has to be in worse condition than the top tier PSA 9s. And I think that's a great sort of insight. It's either someone who has, gone through this and experienced it themselves, where you pull a pack fresh card, you're like, oh, this looks good. There's no corner nicks, and maybe there's like a little like factory nick on the corner, but it's small enough to where it's like, it could get in there, and then it comes back from PSA and it gets a 9. And you're like, pop control, pop control. Why is this getting a PSA 9 when it's clearly a well centered, good looking card? And you look at some 10s you buy on eBay or you get them in, and you look at it like, man, that got a 10. It's like, dude, why is that 2.7? Why does it say 2.7, sir?
That's the morning after.
Yeah. Oh
And you
gosh.
and you roll over and you take a look at what's on the side of the pillow. And you're like,
You're like, Jim, man. Okay. Um, no. I think that's a great insight there, and I do think that there are a lot of PSA 10s that if you were to push them back through PSA, would they get 10s? And sometimes like 10s almost feel like a gift because you get a 10 and like if you were to crack it, would it come back a 10? And like unless it's like Japanese, which just feel like perfect cards a lot of times, or a lot of times modern is doing pretty well besides a few sets here and there. A lot of the vintage like 10s almost feel like kind of like luck. And you have to keep in mind a 10 is not a perfect card. A 10 is a card that is good enough to meet that criteria of a 10. And that's why the black label gets a premium. That's why, in my opinion, the CC Perfects get a premium. And so when you have a card that's you feel is good enough to get the 10 and it doesn't get it, I totally get that. And I think you're correct. I think there are a good bit of PSA 9s, and a huge strategy people have had over the years is to take the PSA 9s, crack them, send them to BGS or send them to CGC, and try to get a higher grade.
Great optimization. Yes. Who coined that one?
I want to give credit to Dan, but I feel like it's been used so often. Like Dan got to catch them all, or catch them all collectibles.
I think there is pop control happening, especially at PSA. That it may not be pop control. It's just more so. It's much more difficult. The standard for PSA 10s has been increased dramatically, especially around if you take a look at like the 2/7 cert era, where you literally see damage cards getting PSA 10 PSA 10 grades. But case in point, T17 Typhlosions. I've seen, you've mentioned before, if you've seen like awesome T17 Typhlosions PSA 9 cards that look better than some of the PSA 10 examples that you've experienced firsthand. And it's just there's no way to prove this. Great pop control, shifting grading standards. If there's like this huge conspiracy going on in the background, we'll never know. PSA will never admit that to us. But I do agree. There are 9s that could be 10s, and there's some 10s that could be 9s. It's just that's why PSA doesn't do subgrades, because it's easier to justify. You don't have to explain yourself when there are no subgrades, which is probably why CGC they removed the subgrade system, so they don't have to, when they award a pristine 10 or 10, they don't have to justify themselves. They just say it's 10.
A lot of Pokemon.
Trust me, bro. It's 10. Trust me.
A lot of Pokemon people will buy the card, not the grade. That's true and true. In my experience, a lot of sports card collectors or collectors outside of Pokemon will buy the grade and not the card. And so sometimes when you get to those tiers of cards that sort of cross collectors, and you see like this really bad looking Charizard hit 200K, it's like, well, that's literally someone buying the grade. And to me, a lot of times it's probably not the traditional hobbyist. It's because most people that are really into the hobby, that love Pokemon, that they want that perfect card, they want to kind of go through a nitpick. And I've had people on big cards ask me like, hey, like what's this little line here or there? And it's not like one person. It's a lot of people like nowadays. And that wasn't the case like way back when. A lot of times like it was like, hey, this card's pop 5. Like, can you get one of the 5? It's not only can you get a 10, it's like, can you get one of them that exists? That now people, if you're spending like a lot of money, more than a paycheck, a lot of people want to make sure it's going towards a copy they're going to be happy with. And people will sit out on cards that they need to get a card that they like. And I think that's, becoming more and more relevant, where people are buying the card, not the grade. But it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. So just keep that in mind. So moving on to the next question, Pomsky Ariel. Would you rather have one Shadowless Charizard PSA 9 or all 16 Shadowless Hollows PSA 7? So that would include the Charizard and the first edition Machamp to PSA 7. Tetra, I'll let you take this one first.
All right. So this all comes down to, in the long run, I think you have to understand what your goals are, and you have to know yourself as a collector and what's going to make you happy in terms of your purchases. So when first edition was still affordable, and PSA 9s were readily available as well, I told myself, like, what purchases should I make that it's going to make me happy in the long run? Like, I think the worst mindset that you can come into it is, I'm gonna buy the 8 now, and then I'll just, at some way down the road, I'll just upgrade it to a 9. Or I'll buy the 9 now, and sometime along the road, I'll upgrade to a 10. I think that is, frankly, I think it's a loser's race in terms of, you're never going to catch up to that, of selling all your 9s off to buy 110. I don't think that's a good mindset, and I think history has demonstrated that's probably not the best way to go about it. I've seen a lot of 9 collectors just held on to the 9 collection. Some of them have sold them off. And I very rarely hear of a situation where someone has upgraded their set, especially with prices these days. So I think to answer your question, I would rather have the 9, because personally myself, that would make me uh, more happier than having the 16 hollows, shadowless in lower grades. I feel I would place more value in having the PSA 9 over the 16 PSA 7s.
I agree with you. I think having the higher grade is better, and maybe it's also a factor of do all those cards because you're getting 16 cards, you're getting a full set versus like one Charizard. Like the prices. Let's assume that those are two equal price. That's the assumption I'm gonna make here. I think getting the one card in a higher grade is a better play. It's less cards you have to move. It's less if you're splitting up the shipping and stuff. It's less sort of transactions in the way. Like I think having less of a few super high quality things is better than a lot of sort of average things, in my opinion. Like save it up to get to 10 over getting a full set of nines, I think it's another example of something to consider. And a lot of that kind of goes to like when you look at the price acceleration over time of like, where does an 8, a 7, and a 9, so where do they all sort of accelerate price wise? That 10 is going to have the highest sort of like the second derivative is going to be greater on that 10. So it's going to accelerate more than the 9 would, or the 8, or the 7. And so it's just a better like financial play a lot of times to get that higher grade. But it also depends on your buying price. So if you're getting a super high buying price, it doesn't make sense. If you're getting a really good price, then it makes more sense. So not only is it like, do you buy the 10 over the 9 over the 8? It's like you got to get those all for fair prices. Like you don't want to overpay on a 10 that's sort of a market squeezing, because then it wouldn't necessarily be the case in that example.
Just quickly, just to play devil's advocate on that, if we're talking about like not like crazy amount of inventory, like if you're doing a play of like Zach's play of Expedition Mewtwo of like 5 to 10 cards, um, that's a safe play. But we talked about this like in a previous episode, like but we were talking about like tons and tons and tons of slabs. Um, Overall, long term, if you're like moving and shaking in the hobby, you're doing this hobby full time. What's easier to replicate over time? The 1,000 sales of the PSA 7s or the one, maybe 2 sales of the PSA 10. If you're just purely talking financial incentives in here and financial motives, then it's easier to replicate the lower sales because in general your buyer pool is much larger in that case. Devil's advocate. I'm just arguing here.
Yeah, I think in an accelerating market, like a growing market, a lot of times you want to buy the big card first because it's the card that's going to outpace everything. And people would always say, "I'm building a set. Which card should I get first?" And it's like, "Well, get the Charizard because like you'd rather buy the Charizard at 30K. I know 30K is a lot of money, and I had a friend that I basically said, "Hey, you should buy that right now." And then but who knows where the price is going to go? But it's easier to get the big card first if the market's growing. It's just going to outpace things. Whereas the weird part now is I've never given anyone this advice, but in like a decelerating market, a market you think is contracting, that big card has the most room to come back down versus like a low rank card. A low rank card isn't going to come down as much as sort of like the big dog. If you're looking at just comparing everything, then the advice is almost the opposite if you think the market's going to contract. Does that make sense? Or
Mm-hmm. I fully understand what you're saying. But talking about markets, American Siski Hunt asked, "Why isn't my mint condition Mew from the 1999 movie release worth thousands yet?"
why did Taco Bell take away the Mexican pizza? Dude, there's so many of those Mews, man. It's a cool card, feels cool. Like, are there 10 million of those Mews? There's probably more.
At that being said, I think it's a core hobby card. I think every person in this hobby should own that card because it was there's just full of nostalgia with that card. It's a core card, and there's actually a lot of variations on that card at varying price points. If you get the correct Japanese version, you're stonking at this point, but at the same time, I feel like that's very niche in depth into the hobby. I actually have a bunch of the when I was trying to buy to like build position. I have like I think 10 of the because in Japan they came in folders, like a portfolio. I have like 10 of those
Hmm.
in storage somewhere of the uncorrected version of it from the first
Hmm.
movie. So they're just sitting in storage, waited to be graded. I don't know if there's any premium to having uh,
Oh yeah,
the original folder. Probably a little bit of a premium there, but
that's cool.
just the non snooty answers is just there's way too much supply. I don't think that was a real question. I think that was more of a question steeped in it was more just a sarcastic question. But anyways, last one.
All right, so Persuasive Barrier 2419 would only submitting X number of cards for $10 to $12 a slab and not having the ability to submit more cards until your previous order shipped back to you work for smaller hobbyists. I think this is getting to a question of trying to get to a lower price point because PSA does not offer $10 to $12 a card. CDC does, so like the scenario is realistic for CDC, but not for PSA. So the reason that this wouldn't work, and I am one of those people that is like, I'm waiting for PSA to get to $10, $12, tons of raw mint that are ready to go just to, build sets. It's more of an issue of, would you rather submit 1,000 cards at 15 or on the off chance that it goes to 12 or 10 in the next 5 years, would you rather save $3,000 on those cards that you don't really intend to sell? You tend to set build. Set builders are the sort of the core of like the bulk of PSA's grading. Why doesn't this make sense? And the reason it doesn't make sense is because PSA is in such high demand. And PSA has so many cards being shipped every single day, dropped off in person. Um, I can't say any numbers or anything, but it is an astronomical amount of cards, and you can probably figure it out with some of the numbers that are released publicly. But it's a situation where if you remember the PSA backlog, people waiting 1 year, 2 years to get their cards back. I get you're trying to sort of put a funnel on it and trying to sort of make it to where you're putting kind of a chain in and everyone can submit for lower. But so many people would submit cards. PSA would be backlogged for 5 years. I kid you not. If they went $10 a card, they would have so many cards. You would not see any card back for more than a year. And you're saying, well, what if there's only so many collectors? Let's say there's 100,000 people that submit 100 cards each at $10 a card. Literally, like there would be bot accounts, there would be a store that makes 100 accounts, there would be so many nefarious players because you're giving people the option to save $3 to $5 a card. And anytime money's involved, anytime there's incentive to do the wrong thing, anytime there's that, people are just going to take advantage of it. And I think in Pokemon we have a lot of wholesome, kind-hearted, good people, and that's one of my favorite parts about the hobby. But I don't feel the same way about other hobbies. And I just think that it would get used and abused, and it's not possible due to the sheer amount of demand and bad actors that would not allow that to happen.
At the end of the day, why would PSA want to knowingly take less money or make less
Yeah,
money? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't.
they want to appeal to the collector. They want people to build sets, but the driving like answer, like literally like from talking to PSA, is that they wouldn't be able to grade with demand. And the backlog would put them in a horrible brand position that they've been in before. And PSA is privately owned; they're not a public company. That doesn't last forever. PSA is probably going to be bought or sold or whatever. And so, maintaining a good brand with happy people is more important nowadays than ever before.
And what happens when we saw what happens when the backlog becomes too big? We
Yeah.
saw everyone just sent the cards to CGC. So why would you change your business model or adapt your business model to help benefit one of your closest competitors? When the pandemic was going strong, all the flippers were sending all their cards to CGC, like every single one of them. Long and behold, now like a lot of like the backlog has become a little bit better now. Everyone went back to PSA, like because that's what the majority, especially in Pokemon, that's kind of like the gold standard of grading is PSA. So it's just what people generally prefer to have. So why would you push? Why would you create a backlog that will just further push your customers to your closest competitor? It doesn't make sense.
I mean, think about the anger people had when they didn't get their cards back within 3 months, and they were told to wait 6 months and 8 months. You can look at all the comments and the posts. If you go to PSAs like Instagram and you scroll back to that time period, every comment is just like ugly and horrible. It's so like it's so mean, and it was just it was a rough time, and people were brutal. And I don't blame PSA for saying we never want to go back to that ever again.
Yeah, just I went through like I went through like the Lycans fiasco during that as well. So I had like a double whammy. I had like cards with Lycans that we had stacked on with the PSA backlog. Long with hold, I did get my cards back from Lycans eventually by some sort of a miracle. They shipped it back before Lycans really hit that ditch in the road and where they got in a little bit of trouble, which is something maybe we can talk about for another day. But yeah, thank you everyone for the questions. I have one more. I have a question for you, Zach. What is the next thing that if you ever come back to Canada, what is one thing that you want to do that you did not get to experience this time around?
So the one thing that I think we have to do is go to a professional hockey game in Canada. And I'm buying the tickets. You're not going to buy the tickets. Like I'm getting cool seats. I grew up in a sort of a place where hockey wasn't the sport. You know, it wasn't offered. I grew up in the South, and so it just wasn't available. And I can tell you, you know, my two favorite sports are basketball and football. Just growing up in that, watching it, I just enjoy those. I play fantasy on both. It's one of those things. But going to a hockey game, I haven't been to that many hockey games, but every time I go to a hockey game, it is the most fun and coolest experience, and the fans are involved. And if someone scores a goal, you bet you everyone in that whole arena better stand up, regardless of how big of a fan you are, and you're going to celebrate that goal. And I think hockey is the most fun sport to watch, and we
You
have to
don't
go
need
do that.
you don't need to watch professional hockey, man. You went to one of my hockey games. You got to see me play low league recreational hockey, right? I want that's one thing.
Semi pro.
Semi pro. I started hockey like 6 months ago, so I'm not very good, but that's okay. But Zach did grace us with his presence at one of my games, and he got to watch hockey played at a very very slow speed. But we had a good time. We went to the bar afterwards with my team as well. It was just a good time. One of the coolest things was I meet like as soon as Zach opened his mouth at the bar, the bartender was just like, "Yo, where you from?" Because you ain't from around here. So where are you from? I thought that was a talent. To me, I've talked to you so many times over the years. I don't notice these things. But to me, you sound like Zach. You sound like a normal guy. But he was able to spot your accent right away. So I thought that was a very cool talent that he had.
Yeah.
All right, with that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the close of episode 16 of the Next Gen TCG podcast. We hit 1,000 subscribers, Zach. We hit 1,000 subscribers, which was a big milestone for us. Our last video was the most successful one that we've done thus far, so we are constantly improving. We are gonna close out, probably, hopefully, get to at least episode 18, 19 for 2023. So I think we're going to reset though in 2024. We're going to do seasons for every single year. So next January will be season 2, episode 1. We're gonna be we're coming for you, Netflix. We're coming for you with the seasons. Just for plans, we want to try to keep working on this. We have plans for different types of content. Eventually, we want to have guests come on board as well once in a while. There's a ton of amazing people in this hobby. So as always, thank you everyone for your support. If you ever want to know how you can help support our channel or support our content, you can just send the podcast. It's free. Link the podcast to a person who you know is involved in the hobby, and you maybe think that we are interesting to listen to, or you can learn something, or you just want to hear people spew nonsense for a long time. Just share the podcast. That's the best way you can do to support us. As always, if you have questions for the Ask Nick and Zach question, leave them in the comment box below, and we're gonna just gotta keep having fun. Gonna keep having fun doing what we're doing and enjoy the hobby that we love.
The market is crashing. Episode 16. That's a wrap.
In the books. Bye.
You know, if you put a black light to your Ancient Mew, it shows you the movie date and time you saw the movie.
Oh, really?
No, I'm kidding.
Oh.
Sorry,
I was like,
man.
how did they not print that? There's no way.
I know. I'm kidding. I'm being mean here.
I should have actually I should have thought of that for half a second and like, that's not real.